Hi and welcome to this DCP Web Blender 2.8 Eevee Fluid Simulation Beginners tutorial. So in today's tutorial we're going to create something similar to this where we've got some text and some water flowing in from the top and the water is splashing over the text and you can kind of see the water see-through, you can see through, and it's got all these little waves and stuff. So let's create something like that. Let's open up Blender. I'm using 2.8, the beta version. So if you don't have this installed, I'm going to put a link in the YouTube description showing you how to install this software, and also I'll put a beginner's tutorial, so if you're not familiar with Blender, check out that beginner's tutorial. So let's go to File, Save As, and we'll change it from Untitled to Water-01 to give your file a sensible name, and we'll click Save. And now we've got this camera, the light source, and the cube. The cube, we want to scale it up, so all we're going to do is click on the cube and go over to the object data here, and for the scale on the X we're going to type in 10, for the Y we're going to type in 10, and for the Z axis we'll type in 5. So let's zoom out a little bit with our mouse. We use the mouse wheel to zoom out, and you can see we've got 10 by 10 and then 5 high. There's another way to do that. I'll just quickly show you. So you want to try and get used to like the shortcut keys. So to scale this object in exactly the same way, we can press S to scale, then Shift and Z. So hold down the Shift key and press Z, and that will scale it only on the X and Y. Then we can type in 10. So that's the X and Y done, 10 by 10. You can see 10 by 10 here. And then we can press S to scale, and then the letter Z to scale it on the Z axis, and type in 5. So both ways are exactly the same. One is using shortcut keys and one is using the interface. Now let's press number 3 on our keyboard. If you're using a laptop, you need to go to Edit, Preferences, and go to Inputs here and tick off this Emulate Numpad here. Tick that off and click Save. And when you do that, what happens is on my keyboard, I'm using the numpad, so 1, 2, 3. So that when I say press number 3, I'm pressing this key here. If you tick off that option in Preferences, basically the keys across the top here are replicated. So if you're on a normal keyboard, then these keys here and these ones across here will do exactly the same thing. Obviously if you're on a laptop, you probably don't have a numpad, so you just use these keys across here. Okay, so we'll press number 3. That takes us into the right orthographic. We'll press the letter G to grab this object, so click on it and then press G to grab it. We're going to press Z to move it on the Z axis, the vertical axis, and we're just going to drag it up to around here, so it just sits. So we'll left click to confirm, and it will just sit above the floor here like that. We can middle mouse click and rotate around, and a nice little feature of Blender is to click on this option here, and when we're in this scene here, this is called the solid view, so we can see the object is solid, but remember inside of this object is the camera and the light source. So if we click this option here, it shows it transparent. So this is only in the actual view itself, in the viewport here. It will show it transparent. When we render it, it won't actually be transparent. But this helps us to see the camera and it helps us to see the light source. So we want to rotate around so the camera is in the bottom right hand corner here and the light source is somewhere around here. So we want to see the object in this particular view, like this. So let's press Ctrl S to save this, and the next thing we want to do is turn this box into a container to hold the fluid that's going to be emitted from another object, right? So to do that, we're going to go to Object Mode and select Edit Mode, or you can press the Tab key to do that on your keyboard. You can hit that Tab key to go from Object Mode to Edit Mode. So we want to go into Edit Mode here and click on Faces, and we want to select this top face here. Select the top one and then press the Delete key on your keyboard and say delete the face here. Now we've got an empty container. So we've got the walls, we've got the floor, and there's no top to it, you could say. So that's almost like our container now to store the fluid that's going to flow in there. Okay, let's go to File, Save. Oops, let's cancel that. File, Save. And we can still see the camera here and the light source. We want to be in sort of this view here, right? We're going to press there's a few different ways to do this. Let's see. Let's go back to Object Mode here first. So we click Object Mode, and the first thing we want to do is make this container an obstacle. And an obstacle means that anything that hits it, any fluid that hits it, is going to be contained within this dimension, or this little box that we've created, right? So to do that, we're going to go over to the physics, and in the physics settings all we'll do is click on fluid here, and in this option here we want to select obstacle, and that's it. So this box now becomes an obstacle basically. Yeah, that's what it is. In the volume here we want to set it to shell, and I prefer to set it to free slip here, because then the water that splashes inside of here will move freely around this object inside. That's what it's going to do. So let's press Shift and A. Shift A, that allows us to add an object, and we want to add a UV sphere. So this is a little UV sphere. We're going to press number 3 on our keyboard. That takes us to the right view, and we'll press, let's just use the move tool for now. So we'll click on the move tool, and the sphere is selected. We want to drag it up, and we want to drag it so that it's above this this box, and we want to now, in fact it would probably be better to do the edit here, so we'll leave it here at this position. Let's rotate back around so we can see the camera in the bottom right hand corner over here. So we'll rotate to this view, and with this UV sphere selected we want to go to object, quick effects here, and fluid. When we do that, Blender will create what we call a domain. So this is the domain, and we want to scale that domain up. So to do that, first of all, we're going to press number 7. So we see it from the top view. And remember, we wanted to scale. Now we want to scale it on the width and the on the X and the Y, X and Y. So to do that, we'll press S to scale, Shift and Z to scale it on the X and Y, and we're just going to grow so that the domain is bigger than the box, right? So you can see the box faint there, and you can see the domain is now bigger than the width and the height, or the X and the Y of this box. If we scrub around, we'll see that we need to move this down a bit and make it bigger on the height as well. So to do that, we'll press number 3. When we press number 3 on our keyboard, it takes us into right orthographic, and we just want to drag this domain down to somewhere like here, and then we want to scale it on the Z axis. So we press S to scale, and then we're going to press Z. So press S then Z, and then we want to scale it up, right? So let's scale it up so that it covers the object like this. So we want to cover this sphere and cover the floor down here, and make sure that the whole this container that we created is contained within this domain. You can see it like this now, right? If that makes sense, hopefully. We'll scrub around this side. Let's just go to File, Save, and now let's click on this little drop down here, and we can see all the objects in our collection. The first thing we'll do is click on the let's click on the fluid domain here, fluid domain, and we want to, let's see, we want to set the speed of this fluid domain to 4. Let's just set it to 4 for now. And then we want to click on the sphere, and the sphere is going to be what's going to emit, or what's going to generate the water, right? So in here we want to set the let's see, what do we want to do here? We want to set the type. So it's already set as a fluid. We want to set the type to inflow, because it's going to the water is going to flow out of this object, and we want to set it to shell here. So set the initialization, volume initialization to shell, and then the Z-axis, we want the water to flow downwards. So we want to do -10, because if we do +10, it's going to flow upwards. We don't want it to flow up, we want it to flow down. So this should be correct in theory. We need to now test it. To test it, we're going to press number 7. So we're going to go to the top view. This is the camera right down here. You can just about see it, the camera. This is the light source, and we want to drag this sphere so that it's in the back corner. It might be easier to see this in wireframe. So I'm going to go to wireframe and zoom in a little bit. And if I click on the cube, right, the cube is our container, and we want the sphere to sit in the corner here, but not too close to the edge. So let's go back to the sphere. Maybe it will be easier to see this in the solid view, right? So let's just zoom in a little bit here, and I just want to drag it so that it sits in this corner, but there's a gap here and there's a gap on the side here. You don't want it flowing over the edge. Okay, so in theory, if we've done this right, let's go to wireframe, and now we want to go to the, let's just check the fluid domain one more time. Let's just see everything's set here correctly. It looks good. Pretty sure we've missed one thing. Let's just check. This looks all okay on the cube. So this cube was set to obstacle, shelled, free slip, that's fine. So let's go back to this sphere here. Let's click on actually the fluid domain. Let's go to File, Save, and we'll leave the settings right now at a low resolution because we just want to bake it and test it. So to test it, let's just set the frames to 100 here. So it's going to start at 1 and end at 100 here, because we want to quickly bake it and test everything before we start doing really like higher resolution bakes, right? The higher the resolution here, the final resolution, the higher we set this, the longer it will take to bake the fluid. So we're going to click here to bake, and basically baking, what it is Blender working out how is this fluid going to flow out of this object and what's going to happen when it hits the floor, where's it going to splash and where's it going to flow to, right? So if we click bake here, we'll see that it's baking, and it's going to take a few seconds to do that. We'll wait for this to finish. Okay, so it's finished baking. If we click the play button, now we can see the water flowing, right? But the resolution is so low, it's looking a bit crazy. It's like all flowing up here. It should really be, I think it might be a bit too close to this edge. I think it's overflowing off of this edge. So what we need to do, we need to move this a little bit. So let's pause it. Let's go back to the first frame, and we need to move this in a little bit. I think it's a little bit too close to that edge there. So we'll check it. Let me just see. Yeah, we need to move this down a little bit. So let's go to the this object. Let's click on the sphere here, and we'll press number 7 to go into the top view again. And we're just going to drag it down a bit and drag it in a little bit here. So it's not so close to the edges here and here. We want to move it in a little bit, something like this. And then we're going to rebake it. So we'll go back to the fluid domain and we'll click bake one more time. So it's going to rebake that simulation, and hopefully it's not too close, because before what was happening, it was too close to this container and it was flowing down the edge and it just didn't look right. So let's see what happens this time. Okay, it's finished baking, so let's click play. You can imagine our camera is going to be like somewhere around here, right? So we went to like a solid view. We can actually see what's going on with this water. It still looks a bit strange. That might be down to the resolution, to be fair. So let's just pause this and go back. Let's go back to the first frame. Let's go to the fluid domain, and in the let's see, in the preview, let's set it to 100, and in the final resolution, let's set that to 100 for now. We might increase this a little bit later. When we increase this, it takes longer to bake. So let's just bake it. It's going to take a little bit longer now. You can see it's moving a bit slower. But it's worth us checking to see, rather than moving the object, let's just see what happens if we bake it at a high resolution, if that's going to fix it. If not, then we may need to move this object a little bit more. And we might even adjust the flow here. It might be just too fast. This velocity is just pushing the water too quick. So we might reduce this down to see if that will help us. So we don't need to bake the whole thing. if we bake around 50% of it, we can at least see what's going on. So around 50%, when it hits 50, I can just stop it. So I'll stop it baking. So it hasn't baked all of the frames, but we can right click here and now we can see at a high resolution what's going on. So now it looks a bit more sensible. Before at the lower resolution it was looking a bit strange. But the fluid is going a bit crazy, right? I think it's a bit too fast. It's moving too fast, the velocity. I mean, it might look good actually. It's splashing around, it's doing all craziness. But I think we need to reduce this to something like -5. Let's set it to -5, so half the velocity, and we'll go back to the fluid domain and bake it one more time. So sometimes Blender is about experimenting, right? It may not be perfect the first time around, so we need to experiment with the settings and just get the fluid flowing the way that we want it to flow, and we have to experiment sometimes to get to that particular position. Let's just file save while it's doing that. We could probably bake it at a lower resolution now, but let's just see what it looks like when it gets to around, we'll let it get to 60, we'll see. So I'll stop it at 60 and let's just scrub through. Now you can see, I think that's going to be pretty good. That's pretty much what we want. We want some sort of movement in the water, but when it was set to -10, the force of the water coming out was too fast and it was just splashing crazy. It might look actually good that way, but it's not really what I wanted. So now we're actually inside of the cube, right? So if we in our viewport, we're actually looking inside the cube. So we can just shift the middle mouse click to get to somewhere like the center, and then we can just scrub the frames and we can see what's going on. And that's pretty close to what I had before in my demo video. That's kind of what we want. Okay, so now that we have that, what we want to do is press number 7. So we're going to go into the top view and we want to move this object backwards and forwards. So to do that, first of all, we're going to set our frames to, let's say, around 360. So we set our end frame to 360. So we've got quite a lot of frames now. This should be around 12 seconds long. And let's see, so 360 is 180, right? That will be the middle point. So let's click on the record button. We're going to make sure the sphere is selected and we're going to press the letter I to insert a location, rotation and scale for this sphere. So make sure the sphere is selected, press the letter I and make sure the record button is selected. Then we're going to move to frame 160 and we're just going to drag this to the opposite side in roughly the same location but the opposite side. And then we're going to move to frame 360. In fact, halfway would have been 180, but we can fix that in a minute. And at frame 360, we're going to drag the object, but we're going to drag it outside of the domain to here. And let's just untick the record button, click on this middle frame, so left click on it and drag it to 180 here. Let's drag it to around 180. That should be fine, that's on 180. So now we've got much more frames to bake. We've got like 180, but the object's going to move, and as the object moves, the water will move with it, right? From this sphere that's emitting it. So let's just scrub down and let's just sort out our camera quickly. So we want to zoom inside so we can see inside of this box, right? So right now I'm in the viewport and all I'm going to do is zoom in so I can see inside of the box, and then I'm going to press Control, Alt and 0 and that will move the camera. Now this is what the camera can see at the moment, and really what we want to do is click on the camera here, click on the object data, and we want to move it on the, let's see, on the y-axis. So moving it, we don't want to move the camera forward, we want to move it backwards, but we want to move it, can you see now really the camera's on outside of the cube? We want to move it so we can just about see it inside. We want to be really close to the edge. So this is just about inside. Now really what we want to do is we want to, let's see, where are we? X, Y. This X, we want to set it to 0. So we want to center out the camera on the screen, get it centered, and then it's rotated around a little bit here on the Z axis. So we want to set that to 0. So that is bang in the middle, right? That's where we want it to be. And then we want to click on the camera here, the camera settings, the object data, and we want to change the focal length to zoom it to here. So we want it to be 40mm. So now we've got a wider angle, so we'll be able to see more of this. And our camera's tilting down too much, so we want to rotate it up a little bit. So let's click here, and we want to rotate on this y-axis. We can actually set this to 0 on the rotation, and then we want to rotate the camera upwards a little bit to something like here, because that's going to be the bottom edge right there. So let's click File, Save. Now we can see what the camera is going to see. Really, we'll go back to the fluid domain for the minute, and we'll click on the physics here, and let's set the preview to something like 45, and the final resolution, let's set that to 45 for the minute. So really we're going to bake it at low resolution, so it'll bake quite quickly, so we can just see what's going on. So let's click bake. It may not work right, we'll click bake. Sometimes when these settings are too low, it just doesn't render out the water or anything really. So let's just click play, and we can see this water flowing in. But that seems, what's going on here? So that seems quite, okay, it does stop when it flows off. So let's pause this and go back. Let's try and set it to 60. Let's set it to a bit of a high resolution 60 and bake it again. So it'll take a little bit longer. Again, we don't really need to bake all of this, so we'll stop it at around 70%. And let's just click the play. If we press 0 on our keyboard, we can actually, let's press 0 and zoom in a little bit. We can see what the camera is going to see now, right? That still seems a little bit too slow. So I think when we set this to -5, I think that was, let's try and set it back to let's set it to something like -8. And we'll go to the fluid domain, and let's try and rebake it one more time. We'll stop it around 70%. Let's play this. Okay, the end here, we need to set this to 12. Speed looks okay, everything looks okay. So let's file save. Let's set the resolution back up to 100 for now, and we'll bake it one more time. This is going to take a little bit of time to bake. We won't bake all of it, we'll just bake some of it just to see what it looks like. Just play this. Yeah, I think that's really what we want. We want it to be like this sort of speed. Let's press F12 to render. We can see our water here flowing out. So let's go back to the first frame. Let's file save, and let's press what we can do is zoom out a little bit, let's press number 7. So number 7 will take us to the top view. We'll press Shift and A, and we're going to insert a text object. So with the text object, we will, let's just click on the text itself. So let's click on the text here. Let's press the tab key to edit it. I'm going to type in DCP Web. You can type anything you like. We'll go to the object data here, and we need to download a font quickly. So I'm going to download the usual font that I download for these projects, and you can download any font you like. So let's just go to this website quickly and download this font. So you can pick any font that you like. Try and pick something that's quite thick and easy to read. So we'll click download here. Let's just create, in fact we won't create a folder, we'll just drag this into here, close down the browser, and we'll right click, extract it. Try and extract it into a folder. We'll delete the zip file and rename this to font. We'll go in there and just delete these files. We're left with our font now. So we can go back to Blender, and in the font settings we'll go to font here, open up the folder and click inside this folder and click this font. That's going to change the font, right? And we want to make this font bigger, so let's set it to something like 3. Maybe that's a bit too big. Let's set it to 2.5. I think that should be okay, but we can experiment with that in a minute. Let's go to object, set origin, geometry to origin, so it's nice and centered out. I think that's going to be maybe a little bit too small, so let's set it to 3, and then we'll go back to object, set origin, geometry origin, let's center it out. I think that's going to be the right size, maybe a little bit too big, but we can fix that. Now we will go to, we'll go to the geometry, and we will extrude this text, and we want to extrude it to like 0.2, and we'll set the bevel and the resolution to 0.1 and 0.1 here. So now that we've got our text in this scene, let's press 0 on our keyboard. When we press 0, we can see the text on the floor, and we want to move it backwards, right? So we can just click on this green arrow, or we can go to object data here, and in the location we can just bring it backwards so it's sitting closer to this wall. Really, it would be better to do this in top view, number 7. So we press number 7, we can see it here. We can see, look, we moved it too far, so we want it to be around here. That's where we want it to be when we move it backwards. And then we want to press the letter R on our keyboard to rotate it. So press R, and then we want to rotate it on the X axis. So we'll press X and then rotate it 90. So now it's facing forwards. So let's press 0 again. Now we can see the text. And we need to bring this camera down a little bit, I think. I think it's a little bit too high. So let's go to the camera, and on the Z axis we want to bring it down. In fact, I think that's actually okay. The text itself, let's move this camera back up. The text, let's press number 3. So we press number 3, we can see the text is actually quite low. We need to bring that up so that it's sitting just above here, like here. It was kind of sitting halfway down. Let's press 0. Now we can see it from the camera view. I think we still need to bring the camera up a little bit. So on the Z axis for the camera, let's see this camera, let's click on camera. On the Z axis we'll move it up a little bit to somewhere like here. Can't really move it back much more. I think that's going to be okay. We can probably make the camera a bit wider angle, so we can move this angle down in. Can reduce this a little bit to something like this. We don't want to see these edges in the camera here and here. We want to keep them out of the scene, but this should be pretty good. This should be fine. Let's file save. Let's go to the text object and let's click a, let's see, what color do we want to make it? Okay, let's click on the text object. Let's go to the material here. Let's create a new material, and you can pick any color you want. I'm going to try and pick like a blue color, something like, we can change these afterwards, right? So something like this, something a bit lighter, something like this sort of shade. So when we go to our render view now, we should see the text here in blue. We're going to blue water, and it's going to be like blue text, but we might change that color afterwards as well. Still, I'm not quite convinced that's the right color. In fact, let's just make it, black. So I'm just going to bring this down to make it black. We can play around with that afterwards. So this text here, we need to now convert it, because it needs to be a mesh, right? It should really be a mesh in order for the water to hit it and to bounce off of it and do all that stuff, we need to make it a mesh object. So let's go to object and go to convert and convert it to a mesh. And when we convert it to a mesh, we can go back to the particle settings here, physics, the physics settings, click fluid, and in fluid we'll set it to an obstacle as well, and we'll set it to shell here, and then the slip we'll set it to 3. So in theory, if we go back to the fluid domain, let's just set it to a low resolution at 60. We'll bake it a bit quicker. We can see if the water hits it and what effect does it have. Let's just make sure that if we press number 7 and zoom out a little bit, we can see that the water is going to flow over the text, and I think the text is, yeah, it's not too close to the wall, so that's fine. And let's press 0.7 again. We can see it's going to flow directly over it, so that should be fine. We'll press 0 on our keyboard to see the camera view. Let's go to file, save as, and this time we're going to save it as version 2. Let's just give this a quick bake at these low settings. We won't bake all of it, we'll bake some of it and then just see what it looks like, and then we can maybe adjust it as well afterwards. Okay, it's baked about 50% of it. That should be enough for us to test it. Let's click the play button, and now you can see the water is actually hitting this text and flowing around it rather than just flowing. Yeah, it's going to interact with that text. That's what we want. It should in theory do that. Because it's at such a low resolution, it's a bit hard to see. You can see the water is hitting on top and it's flaying out, sort of. It's moving to the sides, right? So that's what we want, but when we bake it later at a higher resolution, we'll see that much clearer. It's a bit difficult to see it right now because the water is at such a low resolution. So let's go to file, save. Let's scrub in a few frames. So we scrub to around here. I'm at like around frame 40. And then let's see, what do we want to do next? Okay, I think we need to give, let's try and sort out the fluid and give it a material. So let's click on the fluid here. Let's click on material and then it's already set to glass, right? So we want to leave it at glass, and we want to change the color to like a light blue color. We need to sort out the lighting in a minute as well. We actually do that fairly soon, so let's set it to like a, actually we're going to experiment a little bit here. We'll set it to like roughly like this sort of shade, and let's set the roughness to 1, so it reflects some light off there. And the IRR, we'll set that to, we want a bit of transparency in here, so that the set to about 1.5. And then the blend mode, we want to set it to additive here. Now you can see, oh, Blender just crashed on me. Blender can crash on you, so be wary of that. Let's just open up Blender again. This is a beta version, right? So sometimes things don't quite go right. That's why we saved it at version 2 here. So we're quite lucky, fortunate. So we can just click here and open up version 2. I'm not sure how far we got. Okay, we got pretty far. Let's just fix what we, that happens sometimes, unfortunately. We're using a beta version, right? May not always be perfect. So let's just go back to the render view. In the render view, our text is still black. So we're pretty much where we was before. We've got the fluid here. So this is the fluid. So let's click back on the fluid domain. We'll go back to the material. Let's set it to the blue color that we wanted. So it's like a light blue, right? Just like an off-white. And we'll set the roughness back to 1. Let's file, save as, and save it as version 3. This is why it's worth saving it in steps. So if it crashes, I mean, for all the time I've been using Blender, it's crashed a few times on me, but that's expected. It is a beta version. We set the IRR to 1.5, and let's set it to additive again. And let's try and file save. And now you can see like the water is going to be quite see-through. So when it splashes and does all its thing, this text will still show through. That's what we wanted. Let's click on the cube here. So we zoom out, the cube is actually the container, and let's give that a color. So we'll leave pretty much everything as it is. Remember, we gave it, I think we gave it a, let's see, where are we? Cube here. So yeah, so it's got a principal shader there. So we want to set this to like a blue color. Blue is the theme, right? It's water. So let's try and set it to a blue color. Something like this should be fine. And then what do we want to do here? We want to reduce the roughness, right? We'll set it to something like around 1.5, something like this. And pretty much everything else we're going to leave as it is. Let's file save, and then we're going to go to our render settings here. Let's turn on bloom. Let's turn on subsurface scattering and screen reflections. So when we turn all those elements on, we can see that's improved our water. It's done a lot of things, and it's giving us this reflection. If we go back to the first frame, now we can see like this reflection here, right? We need to sort out our light source a little bit. So really we want like a light source behind the text first of all. So that's going to be this light here. This light is in the wrong location. So let's press number 7 on our keyboard. We'll press number 7. Let's try number 7, and then we'll click on the light source, and we want to move that light so it sits behind the text. So let's just move the light to the middle, and let's just try and get it roughly around here so it sits right behind the text here, like this. Let's pan back down. Let's just rotate around. We need to move that light source downwards, right? So we've got it behind the text, but now we want to move it down to right behind it like this. Let's press 0. So now we can see the light source is behind the text. Let's move it up a little bit to like this. And really this light source, we want to change the color of it. We don't want it to be white. So let's have a look here. Let's go to the light source here, and we want to change it to like a sort of a blue. We want this blue glow coming off of it, something like this. And then let's see. Yeah, this should be. Let's increase the radius a bit to like around. Something like 0.25 will be fine. We can adjust this color. We might make it a little bit darker. Something like this. And then I think that bloom is a little bit too high, that setting there. So let's just reduce the radius, bring that down to around like around 1.3, something like this. At 1.3. This can pretty much stay the same for now. I think it should be fine. Should turn on ambient occlusion as well. So let's press F12 to render. In fact, what we'll do is we'll scrub in a few frames. Let's file save. So I'm scrubbing to around frame 33 and press F12. And now we're getting quite close to the animation sequence that I created before. Although the water isn't quite right. We need to do a few little things here. So really I don't want this glow here. I don't really want that. Let's try and fix that. That will be to do with the cube, right? So we'll click on the cube and its material. And let's turn off. In fact, what we want to do is leave that high. Well, we want to get it down a little bit actually. We want to click on the light source, right? So the light, and we want to turn down this specular here, like this. We don't really want that light shining here. We just want it in the background. So let's file save. And really what we want now is some light hitting the water from a top direction. We want it to be sunlight, right? We want something quite bright, something that we can control, I guess. So to do that, let's see. So let's press Shift A. So we'll click in here, press Shift A, and we want to insert a light sunlight. This is too close to the floor, so we want to drag it up. So let's click on the sun here, got the move tool. We should be able to just drag it up. Let's drag it upwards here. Let's just render. Let's press F12 and see what it looks like. Okay, that might be okay. It looks a bit bright though, so let's see. It's about experimenting a little bit here. Let's press 0 and let's see. We can reduce the radius a little bit here. Where you can play around with the energy it's giving off to see what really works for you, right? Now it's really your time to play around and experiment. What settings are going to suit your scene. So let's press F12 and render it one more time. So I think that's going to be okay, but we want our water at a much higher resolution. So we go back here and just play it, we'll see it's pretty low. It actually looks okay, but we can improve that water and get it at a much higher resolution. The water in my animation looked a bit different, right? It was, let's have a look here. because it's a much higher resolution. You can see it's moving much more smooth, and the text was a bit smaller as well, but I don't think we'll worry about that too much. You can play around with the text and set it whatever size you want. I think that's actually okay, that size. So let's try and render this. It's rendering in the background here. I think that actually looks okay. So let's try and bake this. I'm going to file save. And I think we're pretty good here. Let's go to the first frame. And now what we're going to do is go back to the fluid domain. And we will click on the physics here. And we'll set the final resolution to 100. And let's just set the preview to 100 as well. And now is the time for you to go and make a cup of tea, because we're going to click File Save and we're going to click Bake. And you can see it's done 1%, 2%, and it's going to take about 5-6 minutes for it to bake this. So I'll probably pause the video here and then I'll return and we can see what it looks like after it's baked it, finished baking. Okay, so Blender took a little bit of time, took about 5 minutes to finish baking off that fluid at 100 resolution here. And we'll click play so we can just see the water flowing. And we'll pause it on like this sort of frame here and we'll press F12. We can see the water and the effect that we're getting. And then, now you can go and experiment. You can click on something like the fluid domain here. Go to, sometimes it's worth turning off the overlays. So you just click here to turn off overlays. So you won't see like this orange border. So if you click here to turn off the overlays, then go to the fluid domain and then click on the, let's click on the render settings first. And we can increase, like you can play around with the bloom, right? Experiment with this to see what sort of effect you like. And you can also go to the fluid domain and go to its material, and you can change the color of the water to whatever color you want. You can just like start experimenting. We wanted like a kind of like a blue color, right? It can be like white or just off white. Something like this. You can play around with the settings and just see what sort of effect you can get. You can get like these nice sort of effects here, like these little shines and stuff like this, and the glow, depending on the roughness of the water or that material. So you can experiment and really play around with the settings to get it exactly the way that you want. So that's down for you to experiment with. This is kind of this really gives some sort of transparency to this water, right? And this can really affect how it looks. So you can experiment with this IOR setting, something like that might look quite nice because you've got all these little light effects around the edges, right? You can increase and decrease that. So really, I'm going to leave this with you to go and experiment with to see what sort of effects that you want to achieve there. But we could, let's just have a look at one thing here. Let's go to this fluid domain. Let's have a look here. So when I set the roughness to like 1, this is closer to what my render was originally. So I set the roughness to 1 in this example. So in Blender, if I set it to 1 here, you'll get a similar sort of effect. But this IOR was set to around 1.5. So that's roughly what I did when I created the original animation sequence. But I want to do something different. If I'm going to rebake and re-render all of this, let's try it. Let's try and have it more like transparent, and I want to get like more sort of shine on this, right? It's maybe a bit too much, something like this. Let's play that out. Also, let's go to the, let's just click and rotate here. Let's get outside. Let's turn back on the overlays. This light source can also affect what effect we get on this water. One other thing we want to do actually, let's just try one thing quickly. Let's press 0 on our keyboard. Let's just move into this to like where we see the water. Let's set up a world. So let's do one thing. Let's just save this quickly. So you could render it out like this, but let's try one other thing. I did an experiment last time, so let's go back to our browser. We'll go to this website. I'll put a link to this picture. This picture's got a lot of blue sky in it and clouds and stuff and some green. So I'm going to download this picture. And we'll just drag and drop that picture into this folder, the same folder we're working from. And let's just right click and give it a folder name. Let's just call this light. Let's call it lighting. And we'll drag this picture into here. So we just got this one image in here. Let's try and use that as the world. So let's go back to Blender here. Let's go to the world settings. And let's click use nodes. And then in the surface here, let's have a look. Normally I do this another way. In fact, let me do it the normal way. So if I go to shading here, and then go to object and world here, let's go back to our camera. Let's go back to the render view. Let's press 0. So this is what the camera sees. And let's click on this background and delete it. And then we'll press Shift A, and we're going to put in a texture, environmental texture. So environmental texture. Let me try and zoom in a little bit here for you. So we've got an environmental texture. I'll delete that. Shift A, and I did texture, environmental texture. Then we'll connect. Let's just open this first. Lighting, and we'll click on this picture that we downloaded. We'll open it, and we'll drag it to the surface here. So that gives us quite a different effect, and now you can really go and experiment with images used as light sources. Now you can really have a lot of fun, right? You can play around, and if we zoom in a little bit, let's do one render. Let's render this out, and you see the lighting is much better now. Like the effect that we're going to get is going to be so much better. Let's try one other picture just as an experiment. So we'll go back to Unsplash. Here we can download loads of free images, right? So let's just go to, let's click here, and let's click on let's click on something that's got, let's type in the word red. So we want something with a lot of red in it, yeah? Let's say something like this. We'll click it and we'll click download, and then we'll minimize this, and then in this lighting folder we'll drag this picture in here. It's got a lot of red in it. Let's see what effect that has to our render. So we'll go back to Blender, and instead of this image here, we'll pick on this this one here. I think it was the red one. Let's open that, and now you can see what effect it has on the water. Now you've got like this red effect, right? It's got some like it's looking pretty cool actually. The way it's rendered out, it's looking quite cool. So let's go back to layout. We'll zoom in a little bit, and let's just play. So now you kind of got this red sort of tinge to the you've got these like these lines and stuff going through. It's looking quite cool actually. Let's go back to the first frame. Really, some light in here is casting this shadow. I don't want this shadow to be there, so I think it's this light in the background. Let's click on that light. Let's go to this light here, go to its settings and turn off shadow. That's one shadow. Maybe that shadow there is probably okay, so we'll leave that one on. Let's go to the where's the other light? The sunlight. Let's drop in that shadow. I think that shadow looks okay as well. So this one must be coming from this side, right? Maybe it's the material that's doing that. Didn't really want this shadow part here. I think it's okay though. Let's go back to the first frame. Let's go back to shading here. Let's try that other image and see what we see. So we don't really see it that much now. Let's pick, let's go for something yellow based. We can pick something with a lot of colors in it, right? So let's try colors. Let's say something like this. We'll click that and click download free image, and let's see what effect that has. That's got all sorts of colors going on, so let's see how that looks. Might look pretty cool. Let's go to, we're already in the shading, we're already in the world view here, world, and we're looking at our world material here, or the lighting for it, and that one is this one here. So let's click open here, and we need to go back to layout. So we can see what effect that has to our render. Let's render it out, see what it looks like. So it's really down for you to experiment with those backgrounds in the world. I think I'm going to stick with, maybe it was this middle one. I quite like this one actually. It's got like this red colour to it. So that's really your choice. That's your own preference, which one you want to go for. Maybe you stick with the blue, maybe you go for this red one. For now, let me just try and go to this sun and turn it off. Let's have a look. So we really want the sunlight on because that's going to help that scene. This really helps the background, this light here, the bloom here. So let's go to the cube and look at its material. And then we had this specular here, right? That's more like the original one that I created in the beginning when I show you the example, but I quite like it. Let's see, maybe we'll try something like this. Quite like all these like ripples and stuff going through this water. It looks quite nice, it looks different. I wasn't expecting that. So maybe let's render it out like this. I'm going to just say that's what I want it to look like. You can go and experiment with yours, play around with it. We'll be here all day if we don't decide on something. So the one thing that we can do to improve our water, if we move to like a frame around here, some sort of frame here, something like this, where we can see a lot of water in the scene. If we go to the fluid domain here and then click on the modifier, and then click add modifier, and then click subdivision surface here. Let's try that again, subdivision surface. Maybe, what did I do here? Let's close, let's cancel that. So fluid domain, I think I clicked on something also. Fluid domain, and then in the render we'll set it to 3 here. Let's press F12. And what that will do is it will round off these edges. It will just make the water look better. So if you look at these two little circle things here, right? if we were to go back to Blender and in this modifier here, this subdivision modifier, if we just close it, cancel it, if we zoom in, if you look at the material, look at this floor, this water on the floor here, right? If we add the modifier and click subdivision surface, seems to be taking a while to take effect. So there it goes. Then you can see it makes quite a big difference to this water here. If we go to like if we do on the view, say it's 2 or something, this is quite CPU intensive, so really the view I would normally just leave that to 1. That's what you see in here. But the render, we set it to 3. So when we render, you'll see quite a bit of difference in the water because it's taking the mesh and it's refining it almost. Like, you can think about that. Think of it that way, smoothing around the edges, and the water will look a little bit better as well. It won't be so jagged on these edges around here. It will just look a bit better. So we want to go to File, Save. I'm happy with this. It's not exactly what I was looking for, but I quite like the way the water is, like, you know, you got this like effect here. I wasn't expecting that. Sometimes you do things in Blender, you just don't expect it. But let's see what the final render looks like. So before we do anything else, let's go back to the first frame and click play. And you'll notice when you play it this time around, it's going to move like really slow because you've got this subdivision working. It's trying to calculate all of that and do all of that in the viewport, so it's going to move pretty slow, but we won't worry about that too much. We'll go back to the first frame, we'll go to File, Save. Let's go to the render here, output. Let's set it to, it's set at 360 frames, which is fine. We want to bake some PNG files, so let's open up this temp folder. Let's go to the desktop and into this folder. We'll create a folder called frames, and inside frames we'll click accept, and then we'll make sure it's just RGB 16, and then we're just going to press Control and F12, and then let's see, let's cancel that a second, let's close that. So we're going to close it because we want to do one other thing. We want to set the, in the render here, we want to set the render samples to 120. We want to increase that to 120 here. And I think that's pretty much it. Let's go back to the output and we'll redo it again. So we'll just press Control F12. It's going to take a little bit longer to render each frame, but each frame should look a little bit better at 120 samples. So let's watch it until we see some water. Then I'm going to pause this video and come back and we'll see how it looks. It's probably on about frame 6 or 7. Here we can start to see the water coming through. Here. So I'm going to pause the video here and we'll come back and see what that animation is going to look like in this particular effect. Okay, so Blender's finished rendering out all of the 360 frames. Took quite a bit of time to do that. So it's done now, so we can see the very last frame here. If we minimize this and go to our folder, inside the frames folder, we should see all 360 frames. It's always worth checking before you create the final video what you see here, just to make sure there's no sort of strange looking frames. Everything looks pretty good. We can see what sort of water effects we're going to get. So we just let Windows render out all of these frames or display all these frames. Make sure we don't see any black ones in here or any problem frames. It's highly unlikely that will ever happen, but it's just worth checking. So we just quickly check these. These all seem to look good. Okay, we're good to go. So let's open up Blender. Let's go to File, Save, and then go to here and we'll go to the video sequencer, and then we'll click Add a film strip or image sequence here, and we'll go to the frames folder. We need to select all 360. Select all of the ones you can see on the screen, scroll to the side, and just use your mouse to select the rest of them. Make sure you get all 360. If we click Add image strip, You should see 360 written here. Then normally I'll quickly go to the video preview sequencer and just have a quick scrub of a few frames. Just make sure we see something correct. Let's go back to the first frame. And then we'll go to the output. We'll select AVI RAW. Leave it on RGB. Then press Ctrl and F12. And our Blender will take all of the frames and composite it into a video. So we'll wait for that to finish. I'm just going to pause the video while it's doing that, and then we'll check the final video sequence. Okay, so Blender's finished creating the video clip out of the 360 frames. So we'll close this. We'll go back to the 3D viewport. We'll go to File, Save. Let's close this and check out our video. So in here, in the frames folder, we've got this video sequence now. And let's see what it looks like. We'll just leave it on repeating. And it's like the other one that I did before, but it's just a different color scheme and slightly different light effects. It's got a lot of this light shimmering as well in this version. We'll just let it play a few times and see what it looks like. I think it came out alright. It's not too bad. There's a couple of things we could have done to improve this. I'm going to show you that now. So let's just watch it one more time while that's playing. I'm going to find the where is it gone? Here it is. So that's this one that we created today, and this is the one that I created before here. And they're both using the same logic. It's just a different color scheme and a different lighting effect, but pretty much they're the same. There's not much difference between them in terms of the workflow. So one thing you can do, I'll quickly show you this. I think we closed down Blender. Let's just open up Blender. If you want to make the water look even better, what you can do is when you go to the fluid simulation and you go to the physics, you can set this final resolution to something like 200. If you set it to 200, the time it takes to bake all the frames and to do all of the work is going to be much longer. But the actual dynamics of the water and the way it moves and the way it interacts with this object will be much better, but take much longer to bake all the frames. It could take up to 2 hours sometimes, maybe less. So you need to experiment with that. Set it at sort of 100 to begin with. Render out all your frames, and then you can increase it later and do like a second version at a higher resolution, see what it looks like. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I found it quite interesting, this one, to create these fluid dynamics. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you on the next DCP web tutorial.